All right, hello everybody. We are coming in for the, I think, fourth week in a row, for the last of the Irish history videos that I kind of had planned for the time being. Not saying that we won't go back into more Irish history in the future. It's definitely something to explore, but for right now, this kind of wraps up where I'm wanting to go with that little branch of history for the moment. So, for the past 3 weeks, we've discussed the Irish Rebellion of 1798. We discussed the Irish potato famine, and then last week we discussed the Irish War for Independence, or of Independence, depends on how you want to say it. So this week is kind of the wrap up to that, but at the same time, it's not exactly a positive wrap up because while the Irish did win technically their war of independence, they did get semi-independence. The war that follows amongst themselves is quite tragic, to say the least, after they just made this big win, and that is the Irish Civil War. The Irish Civil War is actually not a war that the Irish have traditionally liked to talk about a whole lot. Unlike the War of Independence, the Irish take pride in that. But when it came to talking about the Civil War that happened in Ireland immediately afterward, it's kind of been almost like a taboo topic because of its very much, it was linked in many ways to the troubles that Ireland would have throughout the rest of the 20th century, such as even the troubles up in Northern Ireland. That's going to be somewhat of a symptom of that, not entirely, but there's just it's a complicated legacy that comes about, and because of that the Irish until recently really haven't wanted to talk or pay much mind to the events of the Civil War. They kind of see it as a bloodstain on their history and kind of a tragic event that this even occurred. And it's a little shorter too. I mean, it was only about a year long, but it's just nothing but tragic to see how the Irish, after fighting together to get their independence, literally turned on each other in an instant. So today, that's what we're going to cover is the Irish Civil War, which is going to be from 1922 until 1923, and this is going to end the Irish Revolutionary period. So we're going to go ahead and cover that today. And just kind of to start off, let's just kind of wrap up like a little bit of a review of where the Irish are at this point. So we're going to start in July of 1921, where in the last video that we discussed that the Irish War of Independence officially had an armistice come about in July of 1921 that ended the fighting temporarily between the Irish Republican Army, or the IRA, and of course, the British forces in Ireland, be it the RIC, the Royal Irish Constabulary, or the Black and Tan units. And in December, on December 6th, actually, December 6th, 1921, contrary to everybody's expectations at the time, where they really thought the armistice was just going to be this temporary truce, no real peace was going to come out of it. On December 6th, 1921, a treaty ends up being signed, the Anglo-Irish Treaty. Now, that treaty, as a review here, here's what it did. Your basic tenets are the 26 counties of Southern Ireland are now going to become the Irish Free State. They're still part of the British Commonwealth, but they have semi-independence, so they're kind of like Canada or Australia. They have that level of self-government. The British military garrisons will be withdrawn, and the RIC police will be disbanded. Now, while these terms are seemingly acceptable to most, they're not acceptable to everybody, because, mind you, 6 of Ireland's counties, out of its 32, so we got 26 out of 32 are part of the Free State, but the remaining 6 counties, mostly up in Ulster, they decided they're going to become the province of Northern Ireland. Britain made sure that in that treaty that Northern Ireland was given a choice of whether or not it would wish to become part of the Irish Free State or if it would like to remain with the United Kingdom. And of course, since Northern Ireland and those 6 counties was mostly populated by Protestants, the Protestants had no qualms about staying with the United Kingdom, as they were not that very comfortable with going with the Irish Free State that was a majority of Catholic. And of course, this is going to draw a little tension because the IRA wanted a united Ireland. So did most Irish. And to see their land being partitioned by Britain pisses them off, to say the least. Now, what's going to happen also, though, that they also aren't going to like in this treaty is some of the members are going to start drawing some sharp criticism, A, the partition of Ireland. They're also going to draw criticism over technically dissolves the Irish Republic that had been proclaimed back in 1918. So, yes, an Irish Free State's being formed as part of the British Commonwealth, but at the same time, we're denouncing the republic that we proclaimed in 1918 and have been living under by ourselves pretty much for the past couple of years. They didn't like that part either. And the part that was really almost a, what would be the word here, salt in the wound to the IRA members and some government leaders was that as part of this treaty, all of the Irish political leaders and members of parliament they had to swear allegiance to the British monarch. They did not like that part either. They did not like the factor that we just fought a war with Britain to get independence. Now they're giving us semi-independence, but we're still expected to kiss the feet of the king. They did not like that part at all. That'd be like asking George Washington to do that after we won the American Revolution. It probably would not have sat well with them. Now, Britain, however, is also going to maintain their 3 naval bases along the Irish coast at the ports of Cobb, Berehaven, and Loswilly. And these are going to become another focal point because some Irish leaders are also pointing out, okay, so supposedly Britain's supposed to withdraw its military garrisons, so why are we allowing them to maintain 3 large naval bases on our shores, on our coast, using our ports, when we're supposedly somewhat independent now? So many Irish Republicans are going to actually see the treaty as a step backwards, and this is actually going to start splitting the IRA. Half the IRA is pro-treaty, and the other half of the IRA turns into an anti-treaty. They are against it in any form because they think it takes them backwards. And because of this, it's causing some conflict within the Irish political sphere and atmosphere and everything else. So there's a little bit of debate at first over whether or not to actually pass and ratify this treaty. It's been signed, but it has to be ratified by the Dáil. And unfortunately for the anti-treaty Republicans, the pro-treaty Republicans end up winning out because in January of 1922, it does end up passing the Dáil through a little bit of a heated debate. Now, the president at the time, or provisional president as we'll call him, was Eamon de Valera, who we kind of talked about in the last video slightly a bit, but I did mention he would play a little bit of a larger role here in the Irish Civil War, at least a little bit. And this was him. He, during the Irish War for Independence, had been off in the United States trying to gain support there. And he and 2 ministers actually resigned in protest to this treaty being passed by the Dáil, by it actually being ratified. Valera, he actually was promoting a revision to that treaty where Ireland would have external association with the British Commonwealth, but not internal. Basically saying, we are willing to work with Great Britain and be part of this Commonwealth, but we do not agree with you maintaining naval bases on our shores, and we want full governmental rule over ourselves. We do not want, Irish political matters to still have to be in the British Parliament. Now, those who had signed the treaty, which were actually led by, of course, Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith, two of the prominent IRA members, they had formed in Sinn Féin members, I should say, because Arthur Griffith, I think, was one of the founders of Sinn Féin, or Sinn Féin, however they want to say it. But they had formed a provisional government upon the passing of the treaty to kind of oversee the handover of power from the British government to the Irish Free State. So they take the leap here. They're actually pro-treaty. Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith are actually pro-treaty, and they actually come to the side of the provisional government. Now, you might ask, well, why would Michael Collins or Arthur Griffith be pro-treaty if they had fought during the Irish War of Independence, like Eamon de Valera had? Well, you got to think about it from this point of view. In the pro-treatyites' point of view, Ireland may not have gotten full independence, but it was better than what they had before. They did have semi-independence, and I think the biggest factor that was really on their minds wasn't so much of the question of how much independence they got, but their question was, is it worth going back to war? Because if we go back to war, we could get our freaking ass handed to us by the British. They could send in the full might of their military, stop us at every turn, and we would never get another treaty offer. So they kind of are viewing it, do we risk going back to war when we're really not prepared for it and could possibly get worse terms the second time around? Or do you take what's been presented to you on the table right now and just take the deal while you have it? And then, and even Michael Collins and the others agreed that although it was not a perfect treaty, it would do for the time being. And they did realize there were ways that that treaty could be worked to finally get Ireland fully independent. It would just take more time. They just didn't want the risk of losing that opportunity. While the anti treaty IRA members, they don't want anything to do with that treaty whatsoever. They very much believe, oh, we can go back, we can fight Britain again, and we'll force them to give us even cleaner terms, of a cleaner break. And that wasn't guaranteed. I'm not saying they couldn't have done it, but you got to also think about the logistics a little bit as well. Now, the soon to come Civil War hasn't actually occurred yet in January 1922. It's going to occur because of that split that's developing in the ranks of the IRA. And this is going to start forming around February of 1922 when Michael Collins begins building a new national army out of pro treaty IRA units because he's, of course, helping the provisional government. So he wants to make sure we are starting to build a military for this Irish Free State, and I don't want people in the military that are openly questioning whether or not we should even be taking this treaty deal. So I probably need to put people in the Provisional Army and the National Army that are going to be friendly to the Free State's cause, friendly to the treaty that establishes the Free State. So he's going to draw from mostly pro-treaty IRA units, and in March, the IRA is going to call a convention. The majority actually repudiate the Dáil's right to dissolve the Republic, and they argued over who would occupy the province of Limerick. So in March, despite the fact that Michael Collins is pro-treaty and he's one of their main leaders, and despite the fact that he's pulling IRA pro-treaty members to become part of the new National Army, a majority of the IRA actually in March denounce the government in the Dáil's power to say that this 1918 Irish Republic is no more, and that now we're accepting this Irish Free State Constitution that's been offered by this Anglo-Irish Treaty. So a majority of the IRA at this point, even though some of their members are getting involved with the provisional government, are openly saying, no, we do not support you. We don't even support that you have a right to do what you're doing. In April, Rory O'Connor's hardline anti-treaty IRA group is going to occupy the Four Courts building, and this is where tensions are going to come to a head in the spark that's going to light the whole gunpowder barrel. Now, the Four Courts judicial system is in the center of Dublin's court system. It's on the River Liffey in Dublin, and the anti-treaty IRA's occupation of this court system is an open defiance of the provisional government and the treaty because it's bringing a halt to all judicial proceedings and going-ons in the capital in Dublin. And this is an open defiance to the government. This is an open defiance to the treaty, of which Britain has made sure is trying to get as much in its benefit as possible. Now, the question is, how do we get the anti-treaty IRA out of there? Because they cannot stay. And this is, you can't just, come on, people. You can't, here in the United States, for instance, you can't just go occupy a courthouse and expect nothing's going to happen. You cannot go with a mob, attack a courthouse, take control of it, and expect that no one's going to come and push you out. And you can't just openly do that because that's against the law. So the question is, how do we get them out? Because they're vehemently against the government and they're vehemently against the treaty. So it's not like they're really willing to negotiate here because they don't even recognize the government as being in power. Now, Michael Collins, he wants to avoid bloodshed because he still recognizes these are IRA members. I have fought with them. I've worked with them. We're best friends with half of them. We should not be killing each other over this issue. He said this is something basically that could come out diplomatically. We just need to find some common ground. Now, he wants to avoid bloodshed by organizing a pact with De Valera, who's very much an anti-treatyite at this point, and he wants to unite the Sinn Féin political party as with the anti-treaty IRA to kind of present a united front, saying we're incorporating both sides of the argument here. We don't want nobody be left out. So let's get together. Let's work toward a single political party, the one that is in the majority right now on the Dáil, and we can work together on this and try to work out our differences. So he proposes joint operations against Northern Ireland. He proposes if you guys come together with us right now, we will restart a war and we'll invade those 6 counties up in Northern Ireland and forcibly take them back, which is what many of the anti-treatyites, that was one of their main grieves with the treaty, was they didn't like the partition of Ireland. So for the first elections for the Irish Free State that get held in June, this is what they're going on. They're going on a united front with one party. However, the pact between the pro and anti-treaty sides breaks just before those elections come out, because the anti-treatyites more or less realize that the promises that the pro-treatyites are making are probably not going to actually be made, such as that invasion of Northern Ireland. And just before the election happens, they end up backing out of that pact. And this also the other reason they're kind of withdrawing from it is the pro-treatyites are also insisting that there be the inclusion of the British monarch in the Free State Constitution, which is another big no-no for the anti-treatyites and the IRA. And Collins' pro-treaty Sinn Féin side actually wins the majority of seats in that June election for the Irish Free State. So they win a majority of the seats. The pro-treatyites do. So the pro-treatyites are pretty much now the provisional government. They are in charge of Ireland, not the anti-treaty IRA members. This is going to start the decline, because 10 days after those elections have been held, the British general, esteemed British general, I should say, Henry Wilson, he ends up being shot dead by 2 IRA members in London. Now, mind you, this is not in Ireland, this is London. Both the pro-treaty and the anti-treaty sides blame the other. They say, well, this side did it. No, this side did it. You guys shot him. Britain doesn't much care who shot him, but they want justice. They want someone to be punished. And Britain blames the Four Courts anti-treaty IRA garrison in Dublin that is occupying the Four Courts. And they actually demand that either the Irish provisional government with the National Army under Michael Collins, they basically give you Ireland an ultimatum, saying, okay, one of our generals just got assassinated and shot by 2 anti-treaty IRA members who were probably lashing out because of anger. That aside, they killed a major general. They are occupying your judicial court system. You need to force them out. You are still part of this British Commonwealth, and Britain made no qualms about reminding the provisional government that we still have about 6,000 troops in Dublin in particular, that we can use. And the ultimatum they ultimately kind of gave them was either you guys handle this problem and arrest the anti-treaty IRA garrison in the Four Courts system, or we will send our 6,000 troops and do it ourselves. So Britain's basically at this point threatening the provisional government, saying either you take care of this or we will. And you won't like when we will. This kind of backs the provisional government and the National Army under Michael Collins into a little bit of a corner. They don't want to start bloodshed, but at the same time, they don't want England to invade either. They don't want a resumption of the war. So, as much as they may not like it, they're going to have to probably force these anti-treaty IRA members to heel. So, the pro-treaty forces, shortly after Britain delivers this veiled threat, they arrest one of the anti-treaty IRA officers, and then, in return, the Four Courts anti-treaty IRA garrison, they abduct a Free State officer in exchange. So this is escalating tensions between the two sides. So Collins and the provisional government, they come to the decision, okay, this is escalating. They're not backing down, so Collins is going to go to the Four Courts with a garrison of troops, and he's going to demand that those rebels, at this point, surrender. If they do not surrender, we will bombard the court system, the court buildings, until they do. And Collins ends up going to the Four Courts garrison, and he does issue them a final chance, an opportunity to, give up your arms, come out quietly. We can still have peace here. We're not trying to start a war. We don't want to do anything here. They did give him a chance to surrender and hand back the pro-treaty Free State agent, or they would attack. Of course, the anti-treaty IRA garrison in the Four Courts chooses the latter. They choose not to surrender and refuse. And when that ultimatum runs out, the pro-treaty troops end up firing with artillery on the Four Courts system, bombarding it until June 28th, 1922. This caused the IRA to officially split across Ireland and to take different sides. So June 28th, 1922 is the official start of the Irish Civil War with this bombardment of the Four Courts system in Dublin. Now, most IRA units, especially in the south of Ireland, are actually going to side with the anti-treaty IRA units that are headed by military commander Liam Lynch. In October of 1922, Eamon de Valera, he is actually going to set up a Republican government to oppose the Free State. So even though he's been involved a little bit with the provisional government, he's still anti-treaty to his core. And now he's siding with Liam Lynch and the anti-treaty IRA by establishing basically a second provisional government in defiance of the one that's already officially in place. And each side is going to set up their rival narratives to support their specific positions. So for the pro-treaty / Free State line, this is the government, the side that is in favor of just maintaining and accepting the Anglo-Irish Treaty. The line was that the Dáil had voted for the treaty, and the people had endorsed that decision with the June 1922 elections. The Dáil had, yes, ratified the treaty, but they argued if the people really were fully against the treaty, they would have voted against them in the elections that we just held in June. So, in their view, in the pro-treatyites' view, they are upholding democracy, the will of the people, and people's rights. The anti-treaty IRA were irregulars, they're mutineers. These are, your rebels. These are the people that they were not for that treaty. They want nothing to do with the provisional government, and they're trying to establish, rule on their own. And their line of thought was that the treaty had been imposed on Ireland by Britain under the threat of war. Britain had basically threatened that if you don't come to a treaty here, we can resume the war. You're obviously not ready, so take your pick. And they also argued there could be no free vote while there was British threat of reoccupation. Britain still had troops in Ireland. Britain still had 3 naval bases in Ireland. And they also argue that because of that, the treaty does not represent true Irish independence. It's a semi-puppet regime. It is not true independence for Ireland. And because of that, the provisional government, according to the anti-treaty IRA, was what they called a military junta doing Britain's bidding. So that's basically the lines that they're going to adopt. Now, we'll show that. Where is it? So this right here, we have 2 pictures of the bombardment of the Four Court system in Dublin during the Irish Civil War. This is one when it's actually being bombarded. You can see the smoke rising in the distance above the Four Court system. This, of course, is the River Liffey in Dublin. But this is when they were opening fire. And you can see the smoke coming up from the buildings. And this is after they've been bombarded and they're just burning at that point. Then I think we also have here a picture of Liam Lynch, who is the prominent anti-treaty IRA commander who's kind of leading the anti-treaty forces during the Civil War. He's kind of these guerrilla fighters against the government. And then we have Michael Collins, who we also saw in the last video, but this is a different picture of him during his time when he was acting as commander of the National Army for the Provisional Government. Ugh. See if I have these. Yeah. Okay. So now that we've established what each side's going for, this war doesn't really go into the full frontal war either. It kind of revolves into what the Irish War of Independence had kind of been like, and that it turns into a guerrilla war quite quick. Initially, there is an open frontal military campaign war between the two different sides, but after only a week of fighting, the pro-treaty forces had pretty much occupied and secured the capital city. They secured Dublin within a week from the anti-treaty forces, and they also ended up securing other surrounding towns and cities from the anti-treatyites as well. Anti-treaty strongholds were located mostly in Cork and Kerry, and they ended up being taken by sea in landings that occurred in July and August in 1922. Now, the British ended up supplying armored vehicles to the provisional and artillery to the provisional government because, mind you, although the British kind of instigated this a little bit, they are going to side, of course, with the provisional government because that's being established under their treaty that they've kind of established for Ireland. They're not going to go with these rebels. So they're actually supplying the provisional government with a little bit of an artillery boost and some armored vehicles. The early conventional phase went to the pro-treaty forces within 2 months. By August of 1922, so mind you, the war starts in June, and by August, the conventional phase of warfare, what we would think is normal warfare, has already concluded, and the pro-treaty provisional government Irish Free State forces have already won out. This is when it starts. So August 1922 marks the shift from when it changes from this conventional warfare to now it's turning into the guerrilla warfare. The anti-treaty IRA, now having lost the phase of conventional warfare, are now going to resort to a guerrilla campaign because they view this as a possible success because it's obviously worked very well against the British. They thought if we can beat Britain, we sure as heck can beat these former Irish brothers who were with us at the same time and obviously do not have the military might of Britain at their hand. In August 1922, one of the tragic events of the war occurs where Michael Collins, as we just seen him, as he's one of the heads of the provisional government and commander-in-chief of the National Army, he ends up being killed in an ambush nearby in Cork, Ireland. And just a few days before that, Arthur Griffith, one of the founders of the Sinn Féin party, he ended up dying of a stroke a couple days before Collins ended up being ambushed. So the fall of August 1922, and you already see two of the major provisional government leaders are dead. They've been killed quite brutally. And it's also kind of sad. It'd be like if the founding fathers almost fought the American Revolution, and as soon as the American Revolution ended, the colonies went into a civil war with themselves, and like people like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Ben Franklin, and all these major founding fathers, it'd be like they all of a sudden got ambushed or assassinated and killed as soon as we gained independence. It would just behead the new American Republic because those were our leaders that got us through the war, and now they're gone because of we can't stop fighting with ourselves. And this is kind of what happens with Ireland. Now, the fall of 1922 sees the guerrilla campaign cause serious losses to the National Army because the National Army is trying to fight like a regular army because they think they're a professional army at this point, where they're not realizing their former comrades are still using the old guerrilla war tactics. And this is going to cause a major disruption to the establishment of the new government. Now, while trying to crush the guerrilla campaign that was going on by the anti-treaty IRA, the government is going to begin the policy of executing any captured guerrilla fighters. The first execution ends up occurring in Dublin in November of 1922 as kind of a message to the anti-treaty, either lay down your arms or every time we capture one of you, we're just going to execute you because at this point you're rebels. You are full-blown rebels at this point. You are not patriots, you're rebels. That's what the pro-treaty line is. But I could say the anti-treaty lines, they're going to call the pro-treaty people traitors. You betrayed the cause of freedom. So it's back and forth between these two. The execution in November of 1922, the first anti-treatyite that ended up being executed was a senior anti-treaty propagandist, and whose name was Erskine Childers, and he ends up being one of those first anti-treatyites that ends up being executed, like being captured. The IRA, of course, like they did when they were fighting the British, they do reprisals. They end up by assassinating the pro-treaty parliament member Sean Hales in response to these first executions. So they start killing pro-treaty members in response. This is exactly what they did with Britain when they were at war with Britain. When the Black and Tan would kill certain IRA members, they would kill certain Black and Tan or RIC members. They're employing the same tactics, except this time against each other. In revenge for the Hales assassination, 4 IRA leaders who had been occupied the four-court system and had been held as prisoners by the provisional government since they had fell in June of 1922, they also end up being executed as a response for the Hales assassination. These were Leah Mellows, Joe McKelvey, Richard Barrett, and Rory O'Connor. They end up being executed in response. Approximately 77 to 81, somewhere between 77 and 81 Republicans end up being executed, and another 100 to 150 end up being assassinated or killed in the field. All these people had fought for Ireland during the War for Independence, and while they may have been on different sides of the war, of the Civil War, they had all fought for the same cause, and now they're murdering each other like nothing. After one of the more horrible instances of retaliation between these two sides actually occurred in March of 1923 after there was a bomb attack in Kerry that ended up killing 5 National Guard soldiers. In response, the provisional government took 17 anti-treaty IRA prisoners, strapped them, and killed them by tying landmines to them. Yeah, they tied landmines to 17 prisoners and then detonated them. What a way to go. That's just one of the darker moments. By the spring of 1923, however, the Republican campaign is starting to reduce to destroying property. They're running out of guns. They don't have much other than, single shot bolt action rifles and a couple shotguns. They don't have the military backing that the provisional government is getting from the British government. So eventually they start running out of arms, they start running out of men, and they start resorting to simply destroying property. They're going to start cutting railway lines, they're going to start targeting elite homes, and end up about 12,000 of them end up actually being imprisoned before the war's end. And in April of 1923, the anti-treaty leader, Liam Lynch, who I'll show you his picture again, who has been leading this anti-treaty campaign ever since June of 1922, he ends up being killed in action in April of 1923. So now the anti-treatyites have just had their leadership pretty much beheaded. The guy that has led them from the very beginning is dead. He's not going to be around much anymore. His successor, Frank Aiken, called a ceasefire almost at once, at the urging of both Eamon de Valera and the civilian Republicans who say enough's enough, let's quit fighting each other, it's going nowhere at this point. And in May of 1923, Aiken ordered the remaining anti-treaty IRA members to, quote, dump arms and return home, ending the Civil War without any further hostility. Unfortunately, this also means there was no formal surrender called and no formal end ever negotiated to the Irish Civil War. It technically never ended on terms of like a signed treaty or anything. But neither do most civil wars, really. I mean, even think about the American Civil War. The American Civil War, there was no formal treaty that ever ended the American Civil War. The Confederate States in the South simply ran out of men, ran out of bullets, and one by one, their armies just surrendered to the federal government. And by the time the last one surrendered, there was no Confederate government anymore. There was never any official treaty that ended the American Civil War. It just kind of petered out. And that's exactly what happens here. It just kind of puffs out, the fire extinguishes, no big ceremonial end. So this comes to an end. So from June 1922 to May 1923, 11 months of bloodshed. And in August of 1923, the pro-treatyites actually end up winning the majority in the parliamentary elections for the Dáil. Excuse me. And they reorganize into, I don't even know if I'm going to pronounce this right. I'm sure I'm not going to. The Kumanagadir Party. I don't even know how they pronounce that. But the Cumanagadhel Party ends up being formed in August of 1923 by the pro-treaty majority that has just been elected to power after the end of the Civil War. Now, while Republican candidates, that former IRA anti-treaty members, were allowed to participate in those elections, many were still imprisoned since the end of the Civil War. Approximately 8,000 to 12,000 internees went on a hunger strike in November of 1923, in which 3 ended up dying as protests to their continued imprisonment even after the end of hostilities. And most were not released until mid 1924, the following year. And here, I'm just going to show you 2 last photos we have here while I'm thinking of it. This is one I did show last week, but the 3rd Tipperary Brigade is actually an IRA brigade during the Irish Civil War. So this is one of the anti-treaty IRA brigades that is fighting the provisional government during the Civil War because they are against the Anglo-Irish Treaty that partitions Ireland and basically ensures that Britain's still going to have some kind of rule over the island. And then the second one we have here is of the group of National Army soldiers fighting for the provisional government during the war. These would have been men that would have been under the command of Michael Collins at one point. Now, due to a lack of effective government and policing during the Civil War, there had been a sharp rise in social and criminal violence, and that needed to be brought in once the war concluded. The war also left many of the Irish nationalist parties highly polarized and embittered with each other, with casualties during the Civil War somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 people. So this is going to leave a complicated legacy in Ireland. I mean, you have a rise in criminal violence, you have a rise in polarization in politics and just bitter political battles. You have casualties, about almost 2,000 Irish men and women and children dead. It just leaves a mixed mess. And in 1926, it isn't until 1926 that the anti-treatyites kind of get their footing again and they enter politics as the new party of called Fianna Fáil, which is still there today, the Fianna Fáil party. And the Fianna Fáil party actually assumed power peacefully in 1932. They actually gained power. The anti-treatyites, roughly 10 to 9 years later, end up gaining power in the Ireland for the government. And by 1939, they had actually succeeded in getting most of the objectionable measures of the treaty removed by acts of parliament and had actually succeeded in getting Ireland pretty much fully independent of Britain by 1937. Now, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, which would eventually come about from was the successor to the earlier, I'm going to try to say that one again, Cumann na Gael party, eventually forms into the Fine Gael party, which is where your pro-treaty people go. So the Fianna Fáil is what becomes of the anti-treatyites, and Fine Gael is what comes out of the pro-treaty. So Fine Gael pro, Fianna Fáil anti. And they're going to dominate Irish politics for the rest of the 20th century. You would even see them a lot during the debates over the Troubles that are going to occur. And for decades, the Civil War is going to remain in this state of taboo. It's not something we want to talk about. I even read, and there was still grudges held to the end by some soldiers, because I did read like a week or two ago, the last known veteran of the Irish Civil War, I think, died 2014, if I wasn't wrong. It was somewhere within the past 10 years or so, and he actually, to his dying day, even though the Irish Republic, the Republic of Ireland's government, did offer a pension to any veteran of the Irish War of Independence, and since he was also a Irish War of Independence veteran, he was entitled to a pension. He refused it until until the day he died, because he viewed that the Irish Republic was the descendant of the Free State. It was. And he viewed that they had betrayed the cause of the IRA during the Irish Civil War, and because of that, they were an illegitimate government. So he wanted none of their money till the day he died, because he viewed that the government that was in power had basically betrayed everything they had fought for to get where they were. Just showing that some people held a grudge for a long, long time. But yeah, this is not a topic that a lot of Irish really like to talk to, and even when they cover the Irish Civil War, not Irish, Civil War, but the Irish War of Independence in a lot of videos, they kind of the Civil War is almost an afterthought. It happens so close to the end of the War for Independence, and it's much shorter than the War of Independence, but it's also more tragic and not really something people like to talk about that much. So it's very rare when someone actually does discuss it in full depth in coordination with the Irish War of Independence, at least from what I've seen. So that does conclude for this video for today. Not exactly the longest one, but then again, it wasn't really a long topic. But yeah, this is going to set up essentially the Ireland that we kind of have seen over the past 100 years and continues very much to this day. But that concludes for today our little bit of Irish history I wanted to cover. Again, like I said at the start of this video, we may get back to it again at some point. There's definitely plenty of topics that could be covered, but for right now, we're going to try to move on from that. So for the next week here, let me see my calendar. I got to look. I got to remember how many weeks we have here until the end of the month. Technically have 3. So next week, I'm debating. I think we might cover the. Don't don't quote me on it, but next week may cover the French Revolution, or we may just take a break next week, because I do know for a factor that the last 2 weeks, including that last week where it was just really 2 days for Halloween, I do want to do some somewhat Halloween oriented history videos. I do know I'm thinking so far that the week before Halloween will be about the Donner Party, that party that ended up getting stranded up in the mountains out west on their way out to Oregon, and they ended up cannibalizing each other a little bit. And then the week of Halloween, we'll probably look into possibly covering a little bit about Vlad Dracula, who's the inspiration for Dracula, the vampire. But as for next week, if I don't have a topic that I really want to cover at least next week, then we might just say that next week we'll take a break. But we'll see. I don't quote me on putting a video out next week, but if it comes out, it comes out. If it don't, we'll just take a break. So we'll see what happens. That way I can more focus on getting those Halloween videos a little bit prepared. Because we've done this for about 4 weeks. I think we could possibly go on a break if needed. And we could cover whatever topic I was thinking about right after Halloween, the first week in November. So maybe that's what we'll do. But this does conclude for now the Irish history. So as always, if any comments or questions come up, be sure to leave them in the comment section below. I actually have read quite a few of them lately. There's still some I need to send replies to, but I have been reading the comments that have been coming through, and it's exactly what I'm hoping for. People are being a little bit constructive criticism. Some people are being critical, which is good. That means they're thinking. That means they got their own viewpoints. And some people are supporting what we're seeing. So that's good. There's a wide diversity of viewpoints out there. That's a good thing to see in a history field, because if you don't question what you're being told, how are you learning? You can't always take what's given to you by somebody else's truth, because that's when society starts failing. We're seeing way too much of nowadays. But that's why our world's also in the mess that it is. So, as again, comments, questions, leave them in the comment section below. Be sure to look over the other Irish history videos that we've done. If you need a review on any of those topics or you didn't get to watch them yet, be sure to go back there and look at them. So, as for next week, for right now, let's just say we're going to take a break. If I have one come out next week, it'll come out. But for right now, I think we're just going to go over break. So, hopefully, everybody has a good rest of their week, and we shall hopefully see you back here for certain 2 weeks from now, the week before Halloween, the week of the trying to think here, the week of the 23rd for the video on the Donner Party. So until then, hopefully everyone stays well and has a good rest of their week.